or another. It was produced here at Harley. It was printed on an old printing press here. The hand printing press. I don't know if it still exists. Does anyone know if it still exists?
It was moved.
It was moved. I hope it wasn't scrapped, because it was a wonderful thing. And it's bound in burlap. And he did all of the printing and the binding and all of that when he got back from Europe after the war. Again, you know, we're informal here, and be a class just like him. So if you need something like he would have, if you want to get up and have coffee, if you want to do anything disruptive, Father came here to Harley very early. We were trying to figure out exactly when. He went to school here right up until his junior year. He was a somewhat rambunctious person, and his parents felt that a dose of boarding school would do him good. So he went to Avon Old Farms over near the Hudson, which is a wonderful, wonderful campus. He made one of the first of many encounters with what later became famous people there, because his gymnastics coach was Paul Child, Julia Child's future husband. There are some marvelous pictures of Paul spotting for my father on the rings and things like that. This was way before he met Julie. He met Julie during the war. So he finished up at Avon Farms. He then went to Swarthmore College in 1940 and was studying engineering, which is a kind of a strange thing to think about Max and Ewell as an engineer, but that's where he was studying marine engineering, and that's when he designed the boat that he'd been working on. That was in the Hartman's garage, and he had been working on that for a long time. So then, in 1942, he left Swarthmore and joined the Army Air Corps, and did a distinguished 99 missions as a navigator in B-17, bombing missions and pathfinding missions. Won a DFC, 3 air medals, Purple Heart. He wouldn't talk about it much, and it was only, I think, like Jay can help me later years, he would begin to go to reunions, and I don't know whether he ever went up in a B-17 again.
No, I don't think so. And he refused to fly anywhere until we were out of high school.
Yeah, he had enough of that. And the only stories we got really were, the only one I really remember was one, and I won't go into it, but it involved a failed attempt to smuggle bananas into ration-bound Britain from North Africa. But anyone who wants to know the story, I can tell it later. He in the Air Corps, he met a guy who was going on to weather school named Henry Nagel, and he gave him a book that Father gave me then later when I was in my third year at Haverford. It was Nietzsche's Also sprach Zarathustra. And I still treasure that book because it has all his notations in it. He had really looked at that book, and I'd added a few of my own, but that was when he really started getting interested in literature and great books. And when he was demobilized, he came home on Queen Mary across the Atlantic, and he met a guy. This guy saw him reading in a lifeboat, curled up in the bottom of a lifeboat on the Queen Mary, and said, you know, what are you reading? And Father told him it was a book of philosophy of some kind. And, this guy turned out to be, those of you who know the history of higher education, Alexander Mickeljohn, who was the founder of the Experimental College at the University of Wisconsin and several other things, and very instrumental in the creation of St. John's College and the great books program there. And he got to talking with him for the remaining 2 days, I guess, and persuaded him to use the GI Bill to go to St. John's, which he did. And so he went there, met my mother, and I was born in Annapolis. Jay was a little late for that.
Rochester kid.
And so then he started teaching at Harley in 1952, teaching mathematics. And I know some of you were his math students. There he was. Good. And he really went the gamut. He started in high school mathematics, geometry and algebra, and maybe calculus. I don't know. Did he teach you calculus? Then he gradually worked his way down. I guess he didn't like what he was receiving and decided to try to do something about it. No offense.
I didn't get math at all.
Actually, there are a number of stories that some of you told of things that they will never forget that he drummed into them. Making bronze, and I think he wrote about that. Knowing where Charlotte, where Java was, yeah. You now know where Java is. Probably been there. But anyway, so he was in 6th grade for a long time. I encountered him in 6th grade.
I had him as a homeroom teacher and an English and history teacher.
And this of course, was great trauma for us because
We had to do our homework.
we had to be really, really good. So in any case, then he went on to be head of the lower school, head of middle school, and then came back to Harley after retirement and taught shop. So I think, obviously I'm a biased person. I trained as a faculty member at college level, then went on to do research on college student learning and development, which I still do. So I have some appreciation for trying to bring out the best. But Father was just marvelous at this, and you'll get it in the poem, The Pothole. Of really, he saw something in every kid, and he was able to bring that out. And he also was very, very playful, and that's, I think, the thing that he was able to be a little kid. I'll only tell one story, because I don't want to go on and on, about when, I don't know where the idea came from, but he helped my brother and I catch our long-suffering tiger cat, Fred, and tie a parachute around Fred's middle and eject him out the attic window. This was our idea, but he was way harder.
He had the scars to prove it.
And so we spent the rest of the afternoon rounding up Fred. That was him, to a T. So I think I'll stop there and ask Mother, anything, Jay?
No.
I think Jennifer.
Oh, one thing I could add is when he first got the job teaching math, the headmaster said, "Well, by the way, you have to teach basketball." And he said, "I don't know how to play basketball." Didn't a little bit, but certainly here's a book on how to teach basketball.
Well, there's a picture of him over there with the basketball players, and of course, all of them are that much bigger than him, and they aren't even grown yet. So that's it. Where did Jennifer go? You want to say something?
Sure.
This is my wife, Jennifer.
We could talk forever about Max, and you can imagine that there are thousands of hilarious family stories. But I'd just like to talk a little bit about the affair of Max and Lily. They were married for 67 years, and he was a devoted person to her throughout all of that. Even after they moved to Parrington Park, he still wrote poems for Ruth, and it was wonderful. But she always talked about, she loved to tell the story of when he proposed to her. And of course it's Matson, the romantic. So he has to take her to this creek with rapids, and they're out on rocks over the creek. And Matson is holding this ring with 2 fingers and spewing forth the speech that he rehearsed. And she has always said that she had absolutely no clue what he said. All she could think was, put that thing on my finger. She could just see this ring washing away. And then for their wedding night, he had always read about scattering rose petals. He had never read about the part where when you mash a rose petal, it leaves a permanent stain. And so he had these white silk pajamas that he had made from his parachute. And forevermore, Mattson slept in those rose petal stained pajamas on their anniversary. And then finally, one of my favorite stories, she had a fur coat. I hope there are no pets. She had a fur coat that had gotten old and fashions change, and so she was going to have it restyled to be more current. So they go to the fur store, and Mattson drops her off at the door. And the person in the store had just unpacked this magnificent fur coat. And so she, over Ruth's protest, got Ruth to put it on so that when Mattson walked in, she was there in this full-length, magnificent coat with a hood and a muff. And he said, we'll take it. And Ruth is like, oh, no, 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 no. And Mattson is, yes, we're going to take it, put it in a box. And so she had that fur coat then for years, and Jay and Peter can tell you just what it's like to try to transfer somebody from a car to a wheelchair wearing a coat that's lined with silk. You pick them up, and you put the coat in the chair, and the person is still in the car. It's a very slippery proposition. But those are just a few of the stories that we can tell about him. But he was always the happiest person, and we would hear them in the living room chattering away with Mattson saying, isn't it wonderful? Isn't it wonderful? I mean, that was the thing that he probably said most often. And he was saying that right up until the end. I mean, he was a happy, happy person. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
I would like to add one simple thing. A line that he said was, to make a marriage last, you have to stay in a constant state of wooing. So we kept going, woo woo.
Thank you. I'm going to bring this little podium over that was made by a student, and it gives you a sense of heritage here. There's a couple boxes of Kleenex. I think I'll be all right.
I noticed there's one on every row. It's definitely waterworks.
But that was just a wonderful, warm remembrance of your father. And I want to welcome everybody on behalf of Harley, and thank you for coming here, and thank you for having this event with us. Bud is a school legend, and his name and his influence still echo in these halls. I thought of Bud last Thursday when the admin team was trying to scheme which day was going to be May Day. And this takes up lots of administrative brain power to work on this. And we were debating, but Bud could easily have been in the room with us, because the criteria we still use probably at one point came right from his mouth. Just listen. May Day has to be sunny. May Day has to be over 70 degrees. No more than one class can be missing, so that everybody gets to be in on the fun. And finally, the seniors should be in session, although everybody understands that they would all come flocking back, even if they weren't. So I thought that that sounded like the practical, joyful fairness that Bud had. And today's kids still enjoy the same antics that Bud may have been responsible, and I always think of May Day as Bud Ewell. Now I'm gonna tell 3 stories. The first time I met Bud, the first time I saw Bud's boat, and the last time I met Bud. So the first time I met Bud, I was brand new to Harvard. This building here was under construction, and I think Len must have brought Bud over to school to check it all out. I really wasn't sure what to expect. I'd heard a little about Bud Ewell. And in walks this leprechaun, who's short, bright-eyed, radiating good cheer, and as I remember, wool-suited. What hair he had was standing straight up, and even wobbling, he walked faster than I did. Maybe it was the smell of sawn wood that electrified, because he went like a hound toward the construction. Then this guy starts in with the questions. He was so interested, so curious. And right with the questions, he started purring out these compliments, one after another. So mindful of what people had done, so encouraging, so brimming with excitement. And I was glad I was there when Chris Hartman proudly showed Bud the workshop and told him, Bud, this room, this whole building is really your baby. I'm just trying to do what you taught me. I'm glad I was there. Now, at one point, we were on the 2nd floor, and there's a balcony that overlooks the greenhouse. Now, this is a construction site, and so there was no railing there. At best, a couple of drywall cans and yellow warning tape. Bud must have seen the blue and the green and the sky and the balcony, and he took off to go look. And I took off. I jumped and I grabbed his belt, because this new headmaster was not going to be the one who was responsible for Bud Ewell taking the tumble. So the first time I saw Bud's boat, in a sense, the Ewell family actually helped build this commons by generously donating the family home. And I thank you again for that generosity. One crisp summer day, in my first month here, the house was being prepared for showing, and I was invited over to look around. Now this home, this family home, is remarkable in many ways. But the one that I remember is the profusion of books. Books about history, literature, mathematics, travel, spilling off the shelves, covering the table. It's like, here you are, amidst the legacy of a family of prolific readers. I don't know that for sure, but boy, there were a lot of books there. But what really caught my eye was this boat looming in the side yard. Like something Johnny Depp or Long John Silver could have, captained. A man who builds a boat in his backyard, who pours his time and his fortune into designing and shaping his own hands. Now that's a pretty good image of a maker, of a creator, of a dreamer. I like to imagine the fond hopes that Bud carried. And probably some of the teasing and complaints that he shrugged off. each time he headed out back to work. A backyard boat builder is a man whose work is never done. And in truth, it never was. Bud's work, Bud's dream, is now ours to still carry out. So the last time I saw Bud, I want to publicly thank Len Wilcox for visiting with Bud and Ruth. So loyal at the Baptist Temple. And I'm glad because Len stopped by my office and reported in after most visits. And he shared news from the family and health updates. And in a way, Len, we might say Bud brought us closer together. So Len told me how during one visit, he and Bud were both a bit lost, trying to remember the names of the brothers of Richard Sarasani, who was an alum who had just spoken at assembly at school. His father was involved with the carving of Mount Rushmore. And while they were both scratching their heads, hoping to spark some light of memory, Ruth chimed in from the next room, and she recalled each of Richard's siblings, name and name and name. And so on the afternoon of Martin Luther King Day this January, I headed over to the home with Ruth's indispensable green history book of Harlem in my hand as a little gift that I thought they'd enjoy. I found Bud seated at the table, and I swear he recognized me before I recognized him. Those round eyes widened, a big smile came on, and I had to think, wow, he must have been a teacher who just lit up around kids. We sat and visited, and later he walked me to the door. And I have to admit that with that balcony visit in the back of my head, I thought he might actually use me to sneak right out the door onto a nice mild day.
Sure he was thinking it.
But we stopped at the window, and the window overlooked this courtyard. There was a round pool and a fountain resting right at the center of the courtyard. Look at it. Isn't it wonderful? I said, what do you see? What do you see? I said, all of them. All of them. It's wonderful. Now, I doubt that I was seeing what Bud was seeing. But I knew enough to tell him, that's great, Bud. I'm glad it makes you happy. And he turned to me, he looked up in my eyes, and he said, the stories, Ward, the stories. They get all confused and crisscross each other, but they are all related. They all do come together. Now, I hope I see those things at Bud's home when I'm near my end. Because in that moment, I like to think that I felt a bit of Bud's power as a teacher. His enthusiasm, his sense of wonder, his conviction that it all does come together and make sense. And that burning desire to help me, others, see what he's seeing, help those connections come alive. I envy those who had Bud for a teacher. He had the power to move people. He was one of those rare souls who can shape the lives of children and of his colleagues. His words and his style have come to stand for what Harley believes. And so, Bud and Ruth, I thank you on behalf of the Harley community for what you've given to our school. Thank you.
Well, their faces up here. By the time I came to Harley in 1969, Bud was already a legend. Bud and Ruth, they represented Harley in a way that no one did before and no one has since. Over the years, Bud and I became good friends, and I continued to find out, new things about it. We worked together on a few projects, the first being a replacement sign for the school. The one that now hangs in the corridor between Beckerman Center and the field house. Sal Rahman, a math teacher and calligrapher, did the lettering. I did the woodwork and Bud did the hard part, beating out the bronze straps and riveting all the pieces together. Bud never sought any credit for his work. I never saw ego in Bud. One day, as I was walking to class, I spotted Bud surrounded by students. He was wearing his Army uniform from World War II, and it still fit. That was when I learned that Bud had been a navigator and a bomber flying missions over Germany. We've heard Bud loved boats and boat building. In the early 70s, a group of us at school, under the tutelage of Dr. Joe Geary, decided that building a boat, two of them in fact, would be a good project for some of our students. One of these, which was finished by the Horizon students, now sits outside the art studio. As we started work, it came out that Joe Geary was not the only backyard boat builder. Bud had one of his own. Break down, throw my glasses. That's better. Bud had one of his own design under construction in his backyard. And it was the process, not the end product, that fascinated Bud. He loved to solve problems. How do you install a lead keel weighing over 2,000 pounds on your boat? Well, by shifting, sliding, positioning, digging out, using the physics of levers and inclined planes. And he did it all by himself.
Even though he brought his two sons home from college.
Well, the story he told me. Bud cared deeply about others. He would do just about anything for his students. There were two physically handicapped students at Harley, one in a wheelchair, and Bud wanted them to have as completely normal a Harley experience as they could have. Difficult given that the school did not have an elevator at the time. So Bud would haul the wheelchair up and down the stairs, carrying the students if need be, rather than saying, sorry, the school can't accommodate you. It happened. Bud brought out the best in people in different ways. Some of you may remember Marvin Batesel. He was on maintenance staff for 4 years. In fact, he may have been the maintenance staff. He was. Marvin made a prize to be awarded to a middle schooler. He was awarded for several years and now resides in one of the display cases outside the library. And if you look closely at the bell, it's used still to call upper schoolers to attention at morning meeting. You'll see the name Marvin Batesel engraved on it. Bud knew that Marvin loved the school, and he made it an integral part of it. More recently, and this is what I loved about Bud as a teacher, a telescope was unearthed in the science storeroom. It had been built in the 1870s by Alvin Clark, the famous telescope maker of his day. I asked Bud about it, hoping that he might know how, not that he would know Alvin Clark, hoping that he might know how it happened to end up at Harley. This telescope had actually been in Bombay, India at that point. He was immediately excited and said, what a great project for the students. Who knows where the research might be? To me, that was quintessential Bud. Always teaching, always thinking of ways to engage our students. He was a true teacher. 2 years ago, I was helping Bud and Ruth clean out their house. They had donated to Harley, as you heard, and needed to sort through some books, furniture, collections of 2 lifetimes. So I was moving some books, I saw something hanging on the wall. And I said, Bud, what's this? He replied matter-of-factly, oh, that's my distinguished flying cross. After some more questions, it turned out he flew 99 missions in World War II. He could have opted out after 25, but he kept signing on for more. The last time I saw Bud and Ruth together was a short time ago at the Fairport Baptist Home. He was still fueled with enthusiasm and a love for teaching. As we talked, I felt like one of the students. And that's the way I'll always remember it.
Thanks,
One thing I should mention about the boat was even though he didn't work on it very much, he said it's the only thing in my life that is the same when I go back to it.
Actually, it wasn't always the same.
No,
there was one instance where he spent the whole summer caulking all the screws, and then over the winter, all the mice ate all the stuff. Good stories. Tom and I want to thank you for this time together that the school has brought. Bud and Ruth into our lives. And we've been blessed to know parents as Mr. and Mrs. Harley and as Mr. and Mrs. Fairport. We lived right around the corner from them for many moons. So I must begin by looking at both of these treasured friends. In 1999, we were able to join others in the community in honoring them as Citizens of the Year. At that gathering, we paid tribute to their countless hours devoted to the betterment of their community and their reflection of all the good things represented by a happy marriage. In their vision and work towards the Fairport Historical Museum and the growth of the Barrington Historical Society, they have impacted many generations in the community. When others in Fairport spoke of Eweldism, he was big into trees also, propagating trees in the town, always aware of what was going on. And he had, the old village of Fairport had a description that said, "What America longs for but seldom finds." And we were able to share that with the Harley community because that's what Bud was about. When I came to Harley in '71, my colleague Bud soon became a friend who shared my academic interest and deepening love for the school. Outside of school, he would anticipate need, such as arriving at our door with firewood when the power was out. And I had just returned home from back surgery, and he wound up, because we didn't have wood at that point because we hadn't used the fireplace yet, so he showed up with wood and got our fire going and was a great friend. That same storm that flooded our basement saturated all the carpets. And here I was just back from back surgery, what could I do? So Bud came over and he cut the rugs into, they were these rugs we had in a former home, and no way you're going to take a whole rug that's soaked with water out. So he cut them into strips, rolled them up, and took them out and put them in front of the house. So, what a great friend. The other thing, another incredible strength that he showed is we had an old wood burning stove, and he found a place where he could actually help me take it out, and we took it down to Jay, and he found a fellow down in Boca to take this.
That has been passed on twice.
So, everyone here can probably imagine his attitude towards the Fairport Parade, where he would know many of the people in the parade as well as those watching. Wonderful years we had spending the 4th of July parades in front of their house, sitting on the benches. And we had it started with our children, and then our children's mates, and then our grandchildren. And so we had this lineup of all these people sitting in front of the Ewell's house watching the parade. And we'd be sitting there. Bud was always running around doing something. I don't remember him sitting watching the parade. And then all of a sudden he'd dash out into the road, and he'd shake somebody's hand, running all the politicians in the parade. And he was in and out, and then he'd shout some question to somebody about, is the bridge going to get repaired this week? He was always aware of what was going on. For our children, Beth and Alan's growing up years, Bud was working on this 30-foot gaff rig catch that we heard about in his yard, short distance from the Erie Canal. And he used all hand tools, and he showed me how he steamed the boards to fit. It was an arduous process. But people's needs would always come first. And so that's why the boat never actually got finished, because he'd be working on the boat, and then something would come up and he'd go. So this is one of those projects that just kept on giving. And there's a joy for children of all ages who would clamber the decks, sail the seas in the Fairport Garden. For some youngsters, working with Bud, working on his boat meant learning carpenter skills. Others, I know my son in particular, it was great, marvelous play to pretend you're on board this boat, either Captain Kidd or those pirates. And then, of course, you can't forget the cookies that always came with any visit, with Mr. and Mrs. O'D either in their kitchen or in '98, was the celebration of Bud and Ruth's 50th wedding anniversary. It was the only such gathering that Hal and I have ever attended where the groom still had the suit he wore at the wedding, and he wore it. And it still fit perfectly. It's a little bit out of date, but it still fit perfectly. And he would later say, Ruth took care of me the first 50 years, and I'll take care of her the second 50 years. And what devotion he has shown in their love for each other also enabled them to reach out in friendship and love to so many other generations. When I first brought Helen to Harley to meet some of the staff and see the facilities where I would be teaching, Ruth was there to greet us as the headmaster's secretary. 2 years later, Helen joined Harley in the development office, and she would then come to work very closely with Ruth and also with Bill for several years. I think she has some things she wants to share about that.
The Harriet Bentley Distinguished Alumnus Award was originated as part of Harley's 75th year, and most appropriately, the first recipient was Bud Ewell. He had first attended Harley as a third grader in September 1930. He once shared with me his great difficulties with reading and the life-changing extra summer help given by a Harley teacher that certainly changed his life and his heart. Decades later, I would witness the compassionate care he showed to individual students and parents facing an array of challenges. With a gentle but steady spirit, he could come alongside in remarkable ways. And what humor and good fun and adventures as well. Of course, it was Bud who was willing to help me search through the foundation of the old barn to find and save the original cornerstone box, and with student help, the old lantern and shingles. He would go on to speak of that old barn and say, "I have a shingle. It helps remind me what the real Harley is, which is not a shingle or a building, but a way some people care for one another and the collective pursuits of the adventure of growth." That's his language. And how grateful he was, as we all are, to see all of that in the revised mission statements for the school he cherished. Never dreamed that our precious Watson would be here today. A few weekends ago, on a crisp but beautiful spring Saturday, I was able to spend several hours outside with our grandson, Watson O'Brien, a first grader at Harley. I asked him what he would most like to do outside at Harley on a nice day. His answer was to explore and do things with sticks along the creek. I remembered Bud had sailed Allen's Creek in a packing crate at the age of 10. His love of boats started early with a child's imagination. Over the years, Bud and I would sometimes talk of his World War II experiences, those overwhelming days when a young man would come through to survive and express many feelings and insights through poetry. That writing brought him back to his Harley school, where they could be privately printed by the Harley School Press in 1946. I think I'm right on that.
Yeah,
Although he had not yet chosen the teaching profession, one of his poems was entitled "The Teacher" and ends with these words: "When I, the great youth lover with perspective, will hold life like a scepter in my hand, and meditating all the great reflective thoughts, spread them for the young to understand. For I'll have lived and lived in such a way that I'll be rich in giving truth away." During our last visit together, Bud was that kind of teacher. I mentioned the recent news regarding gravity waves, and he lit up and described it accurately to me. We communicated more fully than we had in a while, and when it was time for me to go, there was the blessing of that connection. I could share, and he sweetly accept, a heart full of love for all we had shared in life journeys together. Become what thou art, indeed. And dearest Bud, your life has meaningfully touched my life and that of many others for generations to come. Dearest Ruth, how we treasure you this day and always. As we have shared so many times, the legacy of love is through you too. And as we sometimes say, until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hand.
Thank you. Where's my movie?
Good morning. It's this is my first time in the new barn. It has facilities and it has programs, and in time it may come to have character because character takes time. Compared, say, to the old barn, which did not have facilities, did not have anything remotely resembling programs. We just taught the hell out of kids. But it had character. And it had character in two ways. It was, by the time I got here in 1966, it was pretty seedy and deeply beloved. I remember, Ruth, and you and Bud and some of us gathered outside the school to watch it come down one day. And it was a bittersweet moment. It needed to go. It was its time, but that didn't mean we had to like it. And the second way in which that building had character was the people who inhabited it. Downstairs it was Steve and then Dexter, and guarding the entry to the sanctum, of course, was Ruth. And just before her, you had to get past Ralph McKee. And upstairs, in my time, it was Tom Toole, and next to her, my beloved Dina Winholz. And the English office also moved up there. Bob Marshall and I hired to be the Young Turks, and we did our best until we got older and let somebody else take care of the turkeys. That building, with its sense of place and its people, were very much a part of the heart of the school. And I have especially fond memories of the hall, the long hall. Well, I remember it as long, it really wasn't, to the faculty room. And that faculty room was as seedy as the rest of the building, maybe worse. It had everybody's cast-off furniture. Eventually we got one of Diane's couches that we used to beat the hell out of, but that was in the new one.
But not in the bar.
Not in the bar. And I'm remembering a particular day at recess when we would separate. Generally, kids would go off to do whatever they did during recess. We never knew, and it's probably just as well. And the faculty room was always mobbed for those 15 minutes. Now, when you walked into the faculty room, immediately to the right there was another door, and it opened out onto the fire escape. And this was a day in the spring that was warm, but it was teeming. It was raining very hard. And so but the door was open because it was so close in the room. Harley was known for many things, but ventilation was never one of them. The Russell Building was a punishment for previous sins. And a robin had built a nest on one of the steps right near the door. And the eggs had hatched, and Mama was sitting on the babies, but it was teeming. And there must have been a clogged gutter or something, because a torrent of water was coming down right onto the head of the robin. And so she was enduring, but she was not going to leave. I mean, the babies were there. Bud took one look at it and disappeared. 2 minutes, God knows where he went. 2 minutes later, he was back with pieces of wood of various sizes and shapes. And he took off his jacket, and he rolled up his sleeves, and he got down on his knees, and he put his arms outside, and pretty soon he was soaked all over, it didn't matter. And he spent the 10 minutes it took, probably no more, to prop a piece of wood in there and support it, do what he needed to do to protect the bird so that she could do her work. And he was gone because he had kids to see and classes to teach. And I'm sure by the end of the day, he had completely forgotten about it. Because it was just a thing you did when you saw the need. And he did it, while the rest of us were swilling coffee. I'm sure he didn't remember it. There was nothing memorable in it. But for some reason, you can't control memory. It stuck with me over the years. I mean, Bud and I were cut not only from different bolts of cloth, but from cloth in two different universes. But that passing moment, that insignificant thing he did, has always stuck with me. And over the years, it's bubbled up from time to time for no discernible reason, the way memory does. And I've always seen it as the combination of sweet idealism and clear practicality that combined to create the particular kind of hope that was at the heart of Bud Ewell. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael.
I wanted to start by placing this in some historical context. And my preface is the headmaster's preface in the Harley Yearbook of 1959. It's short, and it says, "A good education is compounded by an encounter with outstanding personalities and great thoughts, and your reaction to them. From your response, there will come greater insight into your own nature and needs, and you will therefore be able to cope with yourself and your life." Now, it's a little heavy, I think, particularly in terms of the word cope, but I think for our situation, it applies. I've known Bud for 60 years when I entered Harley in 1957. My prior experience was in Fairport School System. I entered Harley in 9th grade. And there was a lingering preponderance of old female school marms, not to be disrespectful, but they had a strong focus on order and discipline and memorization. And Martha Brown, my math teacher, was very typical of that. And from those of you who know Fairport, Martha Brown is the name of one of the schools there in recognition of her efforts. You can imagine entering my freshman year at Harley for the first day and my making the rounds of my various classes and my surprise in finding a 35-year-old, highly energized, male leprechaun for my math teacher. It was an entirely new world for me. Not only that, I found out that Bud, and I should say in response to Peter's comments, what to call, he didn't call his father Matson. I called him Mr. Ewell, and he was always Mr. Ewell. And I reached a point in my life when all of my siblings going to Harley and all of my children going to Harley and all my grandchildren in Harley, when can I take that moment of not calling him Mr. Ewell anymore, but calling him Bud? And that time did come. But Bud was not just my math teacher. He taught everything. And he covered lower school, middle school, and high school, and my 5 younger siblings, all scattered throughout in the various classes of the school. We were all benefiting from Bud's tutelage. His teaching style I would like to comment on. He always held his students accountable for their work. His emphasis was on the journey of discovery. It was not necessarily on the end result. Some journeys never end, and that's okay. In math, where is the actual last digit of pi? Bud was always fascinated with his students' journeys, and I dare say, I think he was fascinated with his own as well. He had unparalleled enthusiasm for the process and unfailingly supported his students in their efforts. My geometric proofs contained mainly laboriously developed proofs of contradiction, and he persevered in tracking all of my steps along the way. In sum, my lifelong encounters with Bud have had a continually renewing, outstanding personality with great thoughts, and I am very grateful to him and to his family. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Ann Parsons, and I must say it's a privilege to be here today. And I was one of the few who had Mr. Ewell for 2 years instead of 1, which is kind of an unusual thing. The first time, and I'm going to refer to him as Mr. Ewell because I always did. I always have, and I guess I always will. And I started out at Harley, or I returned to Harley in 6th grade. But before then, my first encounter with him was at a very little old house that we lived in when I was about 9 years old or so. And my mother had started teaching at Harley. And the Harley faculty decided to put on a Gilbert and Sullivan play. And it was trial by jury. And I don't remember all of it. I mean, I don't remember who played what. But I do remember my mother and Mr. Ewell and I think one of the old science teachers standing around the piano that was in our living room at that time and singing the score to Gilbert and Sullivan and meeting Mr. Ewell for the first time. And then I returned to Harley in 6th grade, and that was the year that Mr. Ewell was faced with me, with George, with the long Greek name that I don't remember, who was from Greece, and with Mel Smith. And I was a problem because, well, I've always been a problem, but anyway. And George was a problem because his English was not the best. And Mel Smith has CP, and her speech is unusual, and she is hard of hearing. And so, he was faced with 3 unusual students, and he made do. He really did, and he did some amazing things that resonated through my whole life. And I'd just like to share with you a couple of those things that have resonated with me. The first was a fall occasion. It was kind of cloudy, it was a little cold. And we were studying the Middle Ages. This was in 6th grade. And it was called Central Subject back then. And we were studying the Bronze Age and how to make bronze. And Mr. Ewell decided that he was going to teach us how to make bronze, or how bronze was made. And so he had a little hibachi sort of a thing, about so high, and he stoked it with coal, and he had an iron ladle, which he showed me before he put in the fire. And he had copper wire and tinfoil. Put them in the ladle, and he held the ladle over the fire, and he got one of the students to do the bellows. And unfortunately, the ladle didn't stand up to the test. And so the copper wire and the tinfoil fell into the fire, and we never got anything that we could hold on to. But I will never forget how bronze is made. And the other thing that resonated with me, the other thing that resonated was a book. And books resonate with me anyway, because of my parents, because of my teachers, and so forth. But this particular book, and when I was older, I was sure it was called The Secret Treasure of Glaston. I was absolutely sure it was called The Secret Treasure of Glaston. Well, I happened to be talking with a friend of mine on the internet, and we were talking about books we loved as kids. And he said to me, well, I remember this book, and it was about this kid, and it was about Glaston. And I said, yeah, The Secret Treasure of Glaston. And he said, well, I'm not sure it was secret. But anyway, well, both of us went looking for this book. And both of us are blind. And we went looking for this book. And we couldn't find it in the Library of Congress because we were searching for The Secret Treasure of Glaston. And I finally called the Brighton Library because I was absolutely sure that they would know what I was looking for. Well, the librarian looked and looked and looked, and she finally came back to me and she said, no, it's The Hidden Treasure of Glaston by Eleanor Jewett. And friends, I got to tell you, that story, and if you pick it up again and reread it at some point, is about a very lonely little boy who has an adventure because he has been farmed off to Glaston, to the monks, because his father was one of the several knights who took the words of the king seriously. And it wasn't until much later that I happened to encounter the play Becket, okay, and to read the words, won't somebody rid me of that troublesome priest? And, but what resonates with me is standing at the foot of the altar in Canterbury Cathedral and weeping because, not because of the play Becket, but because of the lonely little boy at Glaston who encountered the Holy Grail. And because of that, which took place, I may add, in 1981, which was, 15 years after I had encountered the book. These things resonate. They really do. And what also resonated with me was the freedom and responsibility talk. And, we got this talk. And of course, we heard it from Steve Hendricks, too. But Steve was over there somewhere, at a podium, and talking to the whole school about how important freedom and responsibility are and how they're connected. But it was Mr. Ewell who stood in front of us, as I'm standing in front of you now, who was talking about freedom and how you can't have freedom without responsibility. And the other thing that he taught me as a teacher doesn't come in the education books, and it doesn't come in any of the curriculum. But he made me accountable for my own actions, and I'll just tell you the story briefly. This also happened in 6th grade. That must have been a banner year. Anyway, and this was in the spring. And at the time, the 6th graders were taking French, and the teacher for the French in the middle school was Pierrette Walsh. I don't know if any of you remember Pierrette. And anyhow, she decided she wanted to do a play of Joan of Arc. So she found this play. And I was one of the narrators in the play, and I also had to play my recorder with a booth because it required music. Well, being the dingbat I am, I forgot my recorder 4 times in a row. 4 times in a row, I forgot my recorder. And he finally called me up after class, and he said, "Ann, you're off privileges for the rest of the year. You were responsible for bringing your recorder to class because you are supposed to be part of the group, and your part is important, and you were supposed to be responsible." Now, of course, it sounds small now, but at age, 12? It's huge. It's like, oh my God, Mr. Ewell is angry with me. And I'm sure he really wasn't angry, but he was disappointed, and that was even worse. That was even worse. Anyway, but he made me accountable for my actions. And that is so huge. And when I see students that I have taught in later years, and I think of, particularly some of the students who are blind that I know of, who are given license to do whatever they want to do, and without regard for others, and without regard for thinking about what they're doing first. I bless Mr. Ewell because he made me accountable. He made me accountable. So I'll just finish up with the requirements for graduating from 6th grade. Now, of course, you had to do well academically, that goes without saying. But you also had to learn 3 things. You had to learn the Harley alma mater song. You had to learn 2 verses of the Adeste Fideles in Latin. And you had to learn the 2 verses of Jerusalem. And if you did all those, you could graduate from 6th grade. And as I said when I started sharing, I feel privileged to have shared. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You're on the DQ. You know about you.
You better.
Hi, everybody. It's really good to be back at Harley, although I wish it could have been in different circumstances. Bud Ewell was my 6th grade teacher for 1 year, my boyfriend's father for 3 or 4 years, and then quite a presence in my life for a long, long time after that. And let me say first that after a couple of decades as a university professor, with the dispiriting experience of finding the linguistic skills of my students depreciating every year, I am so grateful for the education I got at Harley. Bud Ewell was so central in that, and of course he remained this enormous figure, whatever his stature, throughout my years at Harley. I also must thank Mike Glasser, of course, because he's why I can write. And Bud was always, in a gentle and sardonic way, as Anne has said, a leader, a role model for all of us in learning responsibility and learning accountability. I don't remember a lot of his specific lessons, but I do, as Peter alluded to, remember a time when we had a public geography lesson every week in which a student would be called to the front of the room and asked to point to a certain place. And of course, if you went up the first time and you didn't know where the place was, well, you know, that's fair. You go to school to learn. After I had gone up the second week and the third week, and I think mortifyingly the fourth week, and been unable to identify where Java was, I swear I can point to it in my sleep ever since. So he was inspiring in his classroom dynamic, but he was even more inspiring in the personal investment he took in his students. One anecdote is, I remember the year I was in the 6th grade, I don't know if this was true for you, Anne, he wrote a little poem for each of his students. It was a tiny thing. I mean, it was on a little square of paper about this size in small handwriting. And I still remember not only the poem, but his handwriting, perfectly, crystal clear. I mean, all of you can recognize it. And I had it for years, and I'm about to move again, and I expect I will unearth it from some corner in my house. And the poem was, I was known as Chotty then. Chotty sits for you beside her, then she pounces like a spider. And I remember thinking on this very heavily. I mean, what did he mean exactly? And for many years. And you know, that was just one of the wonderful, wonderful things that he did. But his particular investment in me didn't only involve the educational one, but any of you who were there at Harley then, I don't know if any of you remember, but my parents were perpetually late, and not only was I always late to school, but many times they were off on some antiquing adventure and they would not show up until considerably after closing time. And so I would be sitting outside on a bench in front of the barn building, and just so embarrassed, just wanting to disappear, because all the other parents had come and picked up their kids, and there I was trying to, you know. And it was invariably Bud Ewell who would come out, stay the extra time, sit by me, make wonderful conversation in his delightful way and respectful way, and you know, keep that going until my parents' station wagon flew around the corner in front of me. And I really, I treasure thinking back on that, because what care there was in that, and how often he was late home, I don't know because of that, but anyway. A phrase that's kept running through my head as I think about him is a little different than what other people have been talking about. Other people have been talking about his boyishness and his mischievousness, and of course there was that, and I remember that boat so well, and you know, even at 16, I knew that boat wasn't getting done. But I understood how much it meant to him. But the phrase that keeps coming back to me is that in a certain way he was always the adult in the room. I think it has to do with what Anne had to say about accountability and responsibility, but he was level-headed, he had extremely good judgment, he was reassuring, and he was a kind of bedrock of reliability. And that, both as an educational security for students, and also as a model for young people, I think was incredibly valuable, at least to me. By the way, I don't know if I ever knew that he eventually taught shop, but it makes total sense. And it makes me think of an essay that he may have known shop class as soulcraft. And I think back and I think, yeah, that was a perfect summation of the way Bud felt about the world. That there was this intelligence in your hands, in your gestures, in your thinking out problems in the practical physical world that was every bit as honorable, important, and for each person unique as very intellectual. Yeah. There was, and I was usually the goody two-shoes in the class. Wasn't I? Yeah. Apple polisher, all of that. But there was one occasion on which I made Bud furious. Furious. I just remember it so well. For some reason, in 6th grade, Mel Davidson and I, why we would do this, I don't know, at the end of lunch period, went to his desk and stole Bud's grade book. Now, this is before computers and the ability to, I mean, I'm sure there was one grade book, and we ran into the girls' bathroom with it, which was not far from the 6th grade classroom. And of course, in the girls' bathroom then, you felt like, wow, there's the gargoyle shield and stuff, you know, nothing nailed, never come in there. And, you know, we were in there sort of giggling together, and about a minute later, Bud comes in. And he lunges for the book, which I think was in Nell's hands at that moment, grabs it, and he says, "I've seen naked women before, you know." Well, we were set back. Sorry, Ruth, but there was a plural there. I don't know what that was about. And we felt about an inch tall. We were very chastened. Anyway, just a couple more quick things. In my later years at Harley, when Peter and I were in item for a while, Bud and Ruth welcomed me so much into your home. And treated us with a respect and a confidence in our maturity and a grace that I still think of as remarkable. I don't know what they thought we were doing in there. They must have thought about it some, but it was so loving, and I will appreciate that forever, Ruth and Bud. I'm so glad that at my class of 68's 40th reunion, I got to see him again, as it turns out, for the last time. And he was still impish and had a twinkle in his eye, and he was spry, as he was over 80, that certainly, I mean, probably in his late 80s. And I just thought of how here, my class was standing, now ourselves, a bunch of geezers. And he had known us all as children, I'm sure still remembered us as that. And that was a very, very moving moment. And so I'm so glad I got to share that. And all I can say is the Harley community has lost someone so important. And I feel that loss. But I know that hundreds of his students still hold him dear in their hearts. And even if for some reason they don't remember him, he's in them. And so I just want to give my love and sympathy to Ruth, and obviously to Jay and Peter and Jennifer. How lucky I am that Bud was around.
When I think of Bud, I think of Ruth. And together they were one to me. They were a model. They were teachers. Their presence was a blessing of grace in our lives. When I came to Harley, this school was filled with married couples. It was like the nepotism at another level. And people were all married to each other, and it really was a village. I mean, we needed mailboxes in front of each of our doors. And Bud and Ruth were the epitome to me of a couple that I admired and found as something I would yearn towards. One of my absolute favorite moments of chatting with Ruth, I hope this is you, because I do think you told me. I was at a meeting, a faculty meeting, and one night you said in the evening, Bud would go and get the embers from the fire. Is this true? And put them in a bed warmer and walk into her bedroom, their bedroom, and slip it under the covers. So when she got to sleep, took them out before she got in. And she'd slip into a warm bed. It reminds me so much of Michael's story, of the metaphor of the bird. That has stayed with me. That is the sacredness of a relationship, that you would go to those efforts repetitively, not once and never to be seen. And I'm sharing it with you because of this one tiny conversation I had with a woman who I admired and knew they had something mystical and magical. And it gave me a model for my marriage to come in these buildings, in these hollow halls, which Harley really has been to us. The other is, remember the advertisement, when E.F. Hutton speaks, you listen? I saw Bud as the epitome of our E.F. Hutton, because Harley was in a very rocky, bumpy, difficult time when he had a head who was out of balance and dysregulated around the vision of his school. The one person that spoke up for me to validate that we were in rocky waters was Bud. And I remember saying to Jay, if Bud Ewell sees this, this is a problem. And he stood up in the room we gathered in, which is now Jay's classroom, and spoke to us as peers. But he said it with such love. There was no vindictiveness. It was just like a, what is the amber light, the red, all I saw was lights going like this. We have to stop and stand up and listen. And we were told as a faculty we were not to speak about what was happening. I was married to a faculty member. We had the gag order. I couldn't even tell Jay what I was feeling and thinking at night. But I had Bud as my teacher who said, protect this school. This is what we're doing. And we rode through that difficult time with Bud at the helm. He really was at the helm. And my vision of him up until that moment was that I always called him ever so jovially as the Will Rogers of Harley. There was not a human being who ever talked negatively about him. Again, a role model to myself. He saw the light in everyone. And I felt it in his presence. I felt like I was this grand person. And he didn't even have to say anything to me. I just knew I was respected. So if Bud told us there was danger, then I really listened, because he didn't talk off on many problems. He would only be this one time. So what I hold dear, and I really don't expect this every night, because we don't always have a fire in the fireplace. But I want to thank Bud for saving my vision of what was beautiful about marriage. And it really gave me a healing that I needed. And thank you, Bud, and thank you all. I love you.
Thank you.
lost my list. I'm so sorry.
And I say hi, Ruth. I have not seen you in a while. And Ruth is actually the person who got me my job when I first came here, because the person who was supposed to have my job left the day school started. So I had just walked in and said, "Hey, you got a job?" And she said, "As a matter of fact." So that was good. So Ruth, I'm so sorry. We all love Bud and you guys. This is very short, and the book that Ruth wrote years ago, there's a quote from it, and I want to read from it. The 1958 yearbook was dedicated with these words. I have to take my glasses off. "You have the ability to understand us when others cannot. You possess a rare, kindly sense of humor when we need it most. Your own time is full, but there's always room for you to help us. And above all, you enjoy life as few men do, and you accomplish more each day than seems possible. Your faithful encouragement, and the example of your vitality have been and will continue to be wonderful inspirations to us. For as long as I can remember, there has been Harley. And when I think of this school, I think of Bud. If there's anyone who understood the Harley way, it was he. Maybe he made it up. From my childhood on, Bud was there. As a teacher, he helped us understand the world, and we came to see it as a magical place through his eyes. When I graduated from Harley, only to return 6 years later to teach, Mr. Ewell, Bud, he kept saying, "It's Bud." But that was hard for me. Was still here, being everywhere and doing all things. Bud was my teacher, my boss, my confidant, my friend. He coached Harley through some very difficult times, as Maura just said, always knowing when to act and when to let things be. I want to share one personal story about Bud that remains clear in my mind that hasn't been said today. As a child, both of my parents worked, and it was difficult for me to get to and from school. Back in those days, most families had a parent at home who took care of the driving, but there were a handful of kids who were just like me. Bud thought of an ingenious plan. He would drive a small school bus and pick us all up every morning and take us all home every afternoon. And you guys were on that bus, correct, for a while. And that is what he did for years. Never mind that he had a life, a job, a family. He saw a need and he addressed it. One day, someone brought a wig onto the bus, and Bud put that wig on and drove around with it on his head all day. We were all so embarrassed, but also highly amused, and we all laughed about it for weeks. Each afternoon, we hopped onto the bus, and I remember him saying, "Do you all have everything you need? Coats, hats, bags, book, homework?" And invariably, one kid would have to run back into the barn to get some forgotten item or another. Bud never yelled or scolded or even acted annoyed. He would just smile and say, "Well, you better go get it." I grew to really appreciate his calm sense of the world and hope someday I could see things as he did. Patience, humility, kindness, and wisdom. Bud had them all, and he will truly be missed. Thank you for making Harley.
We're going to close by fulfilling 1/3 of the graduation requirement. This song was not just a song for Father. He was an enormous Blake fan. And I spent a good deal of time perusing London bookshops to get 300 editions of Blake's works and bring back, knowing that I'd get them again. Blake was very special. And so I think this is a big close. I have a memory book here that folks can feel free, most of you already posted in it, but if you want to look at it or put anything further in it, we have index cards that we can slip in there appropriately. But let's end by singing